What did you find out about your child that you still can't recover from? For as long as I can remember, my 8-year-old daughter Kelsey has had faint bruising on her thighs. Right as one bruise fully fades, another appears, just light enough to see. At first, the pediatrician actually said it was normal, that kids bruise easily and I shouldn't worry about it. But Kelsey has autoimmune hepatitis. Her liver barely functions. Any internal bleeding could kill her. Against the doctor's recommendations, we still tested for everything. Platelet disorders, leukemia, blood diseases, all came back negative. Yet the bruises kept appearing like clockwork. I became obsessed with finding out what was going on. I started documenting every bruise with photos, measuring them, tracking for patterns that weren't there. When I noticed the bruises always looked slightly fresher on Thursday mornings, my eyes went wide. I ran to her school practically on the spot to talk to her teacher, but he barely even looked at me. "Are you accusing us?" was the first thing he said. After an hour of trying to get answers out of him, I had it confirmed to me by the principal as well as cameras that Kelsey didn't participate in PE, she didn't play rough at recess or do anything, but that still wasn't enough. The next day, I hid a camera in Kelsey's backpack. I listened back to the hours of recordings every day listening for something, but I got literally nothing. No teasing, bullying, nothing to do with the teacher. The next Thursday I woke up to see new bruises had appeared, and that's when I could no longer ignore it. You see, her 16-year-old brother Tyler watched her every Wednesday night while I worked my hospital shift, but him being behind it seemed impossible. Tyler adored his little sister. He'd learned to administer her medications. He cooked her special low-sodium meals, read her stories in different voices until she laughed so hard she cried. But still, I felt like I had to investigate him. I installed a hidden camera in her room without telling anyone. I felt sick with guilt, watching back the footage every night. For 3 weeks, her bruising got worse every Thursday morning. Yet the footage showed Tyler being the perfect brother every single day. He'd check on her, adjust her blanket, leave her door cracked just how she liked it. That's when other things started happening. I started noticing other things. How Kelsey wet the bed only on Thursdays. How she'd get anxious when I mentioned working late. My stomach turned constantly. Something was happening in my house, to my medically fragile daughter, and I was failing to protect her. The bruises were getting darker, lasting longer. Whatever was happening was escalating. And then last Tuesday, Kelsey's temperature hit 104. Her body was attacking itself. I brought her into the ER, and the doctor pulled me aside right after examining her. "These bruises show a grip pattern. Has anyone been restraining her?" My stomach dropped. I changed everything immediately. I quit my Wednesday shifts and told Tyler I'd handle bedtime myself. He looked really upset, but said he understood. "Whatever keeps her safe, Mom." For 1 week, the bruises still appeared. I felt horrible for suspecting Tyler. But then Wednesday came, which was Tyler's night to visit Grandma. She has early-stage dementia but still recognizes him. "Give her my love," I said, watching him leave at 7 p.m. At 8, he texted photos from Grandma's kitchen. I didn't think much of it. Until 2 a.m., I woke up in a sweat. I was tossing and turning to get back to sleep, and that's when I heard Kelsey's door creak. My blood froze. Someone was in the house. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, and crept toward her room. The door was already slightly open. I saw a figure leaning over her bed. It was Tyler. He was supposed to be an hour away, but his hand was under her princess blanket, moving rhythmically. "Shh, sweet girl, just like always," he whispered. "Remember, if you tell anyone, Mommy will get sicker. Her liver will stop working because of the stress." Kelsey made a small sound. Not quite awake, not quite asleep. I stood frozen in that doorway for maybe 3 seconds that felt like hours. My body finally moved and I grabbed Tyler's arm hard, yanking him away from Kelsey's bed with more strength than I knew I had. He stumbled backward and his face changed from surprise to something darker that made my skin crawl. I pushed myself between him and my daughter's bed, my whole body shaking with rage and fear. Tyler opened his mouth to say something, but I wasn't listening anymore. I scooped Kelsey into my arms, feeling her small body trembling as she started waking up confused. Her eyes were half open, and she made soft whimpering sounds that broke my heart. Tyler stepped toward us, and I backed away fast, holding Kelsey tighter against my chest. My phone was already in my hand, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911 while carrying her out of the room. Tyler followed us into the hallway, and I ran to my bedroom, slamming the door behind us and turning the lock. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and her calm voice helped me focus as I explained what I had just witnessed. My words came out jumbled and fast, but she understood, telling me police and an ambulance were already on the way, and to keep the door locked until they arrived. Tyler started pounding on my bedroom door, his fist hitting the wood so hard I thought it might break. He kept switching between angry demands to let him explain, and desperate pleas that it wasn't what I thought. His voice got louder and more frantic with each passing minute. I sat on my bed holding Kelsey as tight as I could without hurting her, whispering over and over that she was safe now, that Mommy was here. She was fully awake now, confused and scared, asking why Tyler was so mad. I couldn't answer her, just kept rocking her and watching the door shake with each of his hits. The sirens finally came after what felt like forever, but was really only 12 minutes according to my phone. I heard the front door open and voices shouting, then Tyler's voice getting farther away as officers took him to the living room. 2 paramedics came to check on Kelsey while she clung to me like she'd never let go. They were gentle with her, checking her vitals and asking simple questions while I held her hand. The ride to the hospital was a blur of lights and medical equipment. At the emergency room, a nurse named Rachel Lowe met us and explained she was specially trained for cases like this. She spoke softly to both of us about the examination process, using simple words Kelsey could understand. My hand shook as I signed the consent forms, guilt washing over me in waves for not protecting my baby sooner. Rachel took us to a special room that looked less like a hospital, and more like a regular bedroom with soft colors and stuffed animals. While Kelsey was examined, a tall man in a suit introduced himself as Detective Constantine Riddle. He sat with me in a quiet room and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. I told him about the bruises, the Thursday pattern, the cameras I'd hidden, and what I'd seen tonight in Kelsey's room. Constantine wrote everything down in a small notebook, nodding and asking follow-up questions about dates and times. He was patient when I had to stop talking because I was crying too hard to continue. After what felt like hours, Rachel came to find me with a look on her face that told me everything before she even spoke. The exam had confirmed evidence of repeated sexual abuse with injuries that matched the bruising patterns we'd been documenting for months. Her professional mask cracked a little as she explained the findings, her voice getting quieter when she described the extent of what had been happening to my daughter. Constantine put his hand on my shoulder as I sobbed, unable to process that this had been going on in my own house while I slept down the hall. He told me Tyler was being held at the Juvenile Detention Center and would stay there pending formal charges. Tyler had already asked for a lawyer and was denying everything, claiming he was just checking on her like he always did. Constantine said this was normal, that most abusers deny everything at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. A few hours later, a man named Silas Bartlett arrived from Child Protective Services. He had kind eyes and spoke gently as he explained he needed to assess our home situation and create a safety plan. I panicked for a moment, terrified they would take Kelsey away from me, but Silas quickly assured me that wasn't going to happen. He said Kelsey could absolutely stay with me, but Tyler could never return to our home under any circumstances. Silas asked detailed questions about our living situation, other family members, and what support systems we had in place. He gave me a folder full of resources for counseling, support groups, and financial assistance if we needed it. The sun was coming up by the time we finished all the paperwork and interviews. Kelsey had fallen asleep in my arms, exhausted from the trauma and the long night. Looking at her peaceful face, I couldn't believe how brave she'd been through all of this. The bruises on her legs seemed darker now that I knew the truth about where they came from. Rachel came back one more time to check on us and give me her direct number, telling me to call any time if we needed anything. Constantine said he'd be in touch soon about the next steps in the investigation and prosecution. Silas scheduled a home visit for the next day to help us adjust to our new reality without Tyler in the house. The hepatologist arrived within an hour to check Kelsey's liver function and ran blood tests that showed her enzyme levels were way higher than normal. He explained the stress from the trauma was making her autoimmune hepatitis worse, and she needed to stay in the hospital for monitoring while they adjusted her medications. I signed more papers while Kelsey dozed in the hospital bed, her small hand gripping mine even in sleep. The next morning, Constantine showed up with more questions about Tyler's alibi at Grandma's house the night I caught him. He asked if we had any home security cameras, or if I'd saved the photos Tyler sent from Grandma's kitchen. I suddenly remembered the hidden camera I'd installed in Kelsey's room 3 weeks earlier when I was desperate to figure out what was happening. I told Constantine about it and offered to get him the footage, explaining how I'd been watching it every night trying to catch something but never seeing Tyler do anything wrong on camera. He took notes and said the footage could be important evidence even if it didn't show the actual abuse since Tyler might have been careful about camera angles. Constantine also needed to verify Tyler's timeline and asked permission to check with our cell phone provider for location data. Silas called later that day to arrange for Kelsey to be interviewed at the Child Advocacy Center, once the doctor said she was stable enough. He explained it was a special place designed to make kids feel safe while talking about hard things, with trained interviewers who knew how to work with children who'd been hurt. The interview would be recorded so Kelsey wouldn't have to tell her story over and over to different people. Constantine went to visit Grandma at her house to check Tyler's alibi, but called me afterward to say her dementia made her testimony unreliable. She kept mixing up days and couldn't remember if Tyler visited last Wednesday or last month or even last year. She mentioned Tyler coming by on different days than he'd claimed, but then would contradict herself minutes later. Constantine said this actually helped our case because it meant Tyler's alibi was basically worthless. 2 days into Kelsey's hospital stay, I got an official letter from Tyler's defense attorney, someone named Wellington Crockett. The letter was full of legal language but basically said he was representing Tyler and wanted to remind me that Kelsey's bruising could be from her medical condition, not abuse. He wrote about how autoimmune hepatitis can cause easy bruising and suggested I was misinterpreting innocent behavior because of my stress about Kelsey's health. Reading his words made me so mad my hands shook. The next day, the prosecutor assigned to our case came to meet me at the hospital. Magdalena Rowe was younger than I expected, but seemed really confident as she went through the evidence with me. She said the forensic exam results combined with what I witnessed gave us a strong case, but she warned me that Tyler's age and clean record would be factors the judge would consider. She explained the juvenile justice system worked differently than adult court and focused more on rehabilitation than punishment. Magdalena said Tyler would probably try to plea bargain once he realized how much evidence we had against him. After 3 days in the hospital with her medications adjusted and her enzyme levels finally starting to drop, Kelsey was discharged with a thick folder of instructions for monitoring her at home. She hadn't said a word about what Tyler did to her, just clung to me constantly, and cried if I even went to the bathroom without her. The doctors said this was normal trauma response and would get better with time and therapy. Rachel gave us a referral to Newton Stokes, a child trauma therapist who specialized in cases like ours. Our first appointment was scheduled for the next week, and I was nervous about how Kelsey would react to talking to another stranger. When we got there, Newton's office looked more like a playroom than a doctor's office, with toys and art supplies everywhere. He spent the first session just playing with Kelsey, not asking her any questions about Tyler or what happened. He used puppets and dolls to help her feel comfortable, and by the end she was actually smiling a little as she colored a picture. Newton explained to me afterward that play therapy would help Kelsey process what happened at her own pace, without forcing her to talk before she was ready. He said it might take weeks or months before she could verbalize her experiences, but the play would help her brain start healing from the trauma. Constantine called me a few days later with an update on the digital forensics from Tyler's phone and computer. The tech team had recovered deleted search history that made my skin crawl. Tyler had been looking up things like how to keep children quiet during abuse, how to avoid leaving physical evidence, and what to say to make kids not tell anyone. The searches went back months, showing this wasn't some sudden impulse but something he'd been planning. Constantine said they also found Tyler had been deleting his location history on the nights he was supposed to be at Grandma's, more proof he was lying about where he'd been. The next morning my phone rang while I was making Kelsey breakfast, and it was her school principal asking when she might come back to class. She offered extra support like a classroom aide and shorter days, but I told her Kelsey needed more time. 2 days later, Silas showed up at our house with a clipboard and started checking every door and window. He wrote down that we needed new deadbolts on all the doors, and those little alarms that beep when doors open. He went through Tyler's room and packed up his stuff in boxes while I watched from the doorway. The room looked so empty after he taped them shut and stacked them in the garage. He stuck safety locks on the medicine cabinet and put a chain high up on Kelsey's door, so she could lock it from inside if she wanted. The whole house felt different with all these changes, but also safer somehow. That same afternoon, a woman named Honoria Swanson called and said she was our victim advocate. She explained how the court stuff would work and gave me her cell number to call anytime, day or night. She sent me a thick packet in the mail with information about counseling services and support groups and legal rights I didn't even know we had. 3 days later, Constantine called to tell me Tyler was being formally charged in juvenile court. The charges were multiple counts of sexual abuse of a minor, and his lawyer Wellington had already entered a not guilty plea. Constantine said this was normal and not to worry because the evidence was strong. I had to go back to work the next Monday because we needed the money and my sick days were running out. My supervisor let me work shorter shifts and take breaks whenever I needed them. My coworkers kept giving me these looks like they knew something bad had happened but didn't want to ask. I just focused on my patients and tried not to think about everything else. Constantine called me at work 2 days later with news about those photos Tyler sent from Grandma's house. The tech team checked the metadata and found out the pictures were actually taken 3 hours before he sent them to me. He'd taken them earlier and then sent them later to make it look like he was still there when he'd already left. This destroyed his whole alibi, and Constantine said it showed planning and deception that would help our case. The next week we had to go to the Child Advocacy Center for Kelsey's forensic interview. The building looked like a regular house from outside with toys in the yard and bright painted walls inside. They took me to a small room with a TV screen where I could watch Kelsey in another room with the interviewer. The interviewer was really gentle and let Kelsey play with dolls while they talked. At first, Kelsey just played quietly, but then she started whispering about the bad touches. She used the dolls to show what Tyler did, and my hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. She told the interviewer that Tyler said I would die if she told anyone, because my liver would stop working from the stress. The interviewer asked how long this had been happening, and Kelsey held up 6 fingers for 6 months. She said it was always on Wednesday nights when I was at work. Tyler would come back to her room after I fell asleep, and he had alarms on his phone to wake him up. She showed with the dolls how he would hold her legs down, and that's where the bruises came from. The interview lasted almost 2 hours, and by the end, Kelsey was crying and asking for me. They let me go to her right away, and I held her while she sobbed into my shirt. The interviewer gave me a copy of the recording and said it would be used as evidence so Kelsey wouldn't have to testify in court. 2 days after that, Magdalena called me about a plea deal Tyler's lawyer wanted to discuss. They wanted him to plead to lesser charges and avoid trial. But I was so mad I could barely speak. Magdalena said she understood my anger, but wanted me to think about whether Kelsey could handle a trial if it came to that. She said Tyler would still have to register as a sex offender and would face serious consequences either way. I told her I needed time to think about it, but inside I wanted him to face the maximum punishment possible. The stress was affecting Kelsey's health, and during her regular blood work appointment, her liver enzymes came back dangerously high. The doctor said we needed to admit her to the hospital immediately because her body was attacking itself from all the trauma. They started intravenous medications to suppress her immune system and protect her liver, but she was so scared of being in the hospital again. I stayed with her every night, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair next to her bed. The nurses brought me blankets and coffee and never said anything about visiting hours. Her main doctor adjusted all her medications and said the stress was making her autoimmune condition worse. They kept her for 5 days, monitoring her levels every few hours, and slowly the numbers started getting better. Magdalena visited us in the hospital to go over more evidence and said Tyler's psychological evaluation showed he knew exactly what he was doing. The evaluator found no mental illness or disorder that would explain his behavior, just calculated choices to hurt his sister. Constantine came by too with updates on other families who had concerns about Tyler, but no confirmed abuse, which still helped show a pattern of inappropriate behavior with younger kids. While Kelsey stayed in the hospital that week, I went home to pack up Tyler's room. I couldn't stand seeing his stuff everywhere, knowing what he'd done. I pulled his posters off the walls and threw his trophies in boxes without looking at them. When I yanked open his desk drawer, a black notebook fell out onto the floor. I picked it up and saw my work schedule written on the first page in his handwriting. Every Wednesday shift I'd worked for the past 6 months was marked with a red X. He'd written notes next to some dates about when I got home and what time I fell asleep. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of his planning. He'd studied my patterns and knew exactly when he could hurt her without getting caught. I took photos of every page and sent them to Constantine right away. 3 days later, Newton called me about Kelsey's therapy session. He said she was starting to open up using the dolls in his office. She made one doll be the bad brother and showed him touching the little sister doll in her private areas. Newton said watching her act it out was hard, but it meant she was starting to process what happened. Each session left me crying in my car afterward, but I could see tiny bits of progress. Wellington sent a letter from Tyler through the mail the next week. I didn't want to open it, but Magdalena said I should know what he was saying. Tyler wrote that he was sorry for disappointing me, but claimed he never hurt Kelsey the way everyone was saying. He said the bruises were accidents from playing too rough and nothing worse happened. Wellington included a note saying I shouldn't show the letter to Kelsey under any circumstances. I agreed and put it in the evidence folder with everything else. Constantine called me 2 days after that with news that made my stomach turn. 2 other families had come forward after hearing about Tyler's arrest. Their kids had gone to sleepovers at our house over the past year. Nothing was confirmed, but both families said their children acted strange after staying over. One mom said her daughter wouldn't sleep alone for weeks after the sleepover. The other family's son started wetting the bed again at age 9. Constantine said they were still investigating, but it showed a pattern that would help our case. Magdalena met with me that afternoon to explain how the new complaints made things worse for Tyler. She said having multiple potential victims made it much more likely he'd be convicted if we went to trial. The judge would see it wasn't just about Kelsey, but a bigger pattern of concerning behavior with kids. She thought Tyler's lawyer would push harder for a plea deal now to avoid facing all these allegations in court. That same week, Kelsey started having terrible nightmares every single night. She'd wake up screaming about someone being in her room and wouldn't believe me when I said she was safe. I'd hold her for hours while she shook and cried. Newton taught me grounding techniques to help her know she was in the present, and not back in those Wednesday nights. We'd count 5 things she could see, 4 things she could touch, 3 things she could hear, 2 things she could smell, and 1 thing she could taste. It helped sometimes, but other nights nothing worked and she'd stay awake until morning. I was barely sleeping myself and knew I needed help to get through this. Artemisia ran a support group at the community center for parents of abused children. I went to my first meeting on a Tuesday evening and sat in a circle with 6 other moms. They all had stories like mine about missing the signs and feeling guilty. One mom's daughter was hurt by an uncle for years before anyone knew. Another mom's son was abused by his coach, and she'd thought the behavior changes were just puberty. Hearing their stories helped me realize I wasn't the worst mother in the world for not catching it sooner. The pretrial hearing came up faster than I expected, just 3 weeks after Tyler's arrest. Wellington challenged whether my hidden camera footage could be used as evidence since Tyler didn't know he was recorded. The prosecutor argued I had every right to put cameras in my own home when I was worried about my daughter's safety. The judge listened to both sides for over an hour before making her decision. She ruled the footage was admissible because it was my house, and I had legitimate concerns about Kelsey's well-being. Wellington looked mad but couldn't argue with the ruling. After the hearing, Magdalena sat down with me to go over all the evidence we had against Tyler. She showed me the forensic exam results that proved repeated abuse over months. She had Kelsey's recorded interview where she described everything Tyler did to her. The metadata from those fake photos at Grandma's house proved he lied about his alibi. Constantine's team had found his deleted internet searches about keeping kids quiet during abuse. Magdalena said with all this evidence plus the other family's concerns, Tyler would probably take a plea deal to avoid being tried as an adult. She thought his lawyer would come back with an offer within the next few weeks. 2 months after everything started, Kelsey was finally ready to go back to the school. We worked out a modified schedule where she only went for half days at first. The counselor met with her every morning to check how she was doing. Her teacher knew something had happened, but not the details, and was really patient when Kelsey couldn't focus on her work. Some days she'd just stare out the window and not hear anything the teacher said. Other days she'd panic if a male teacher came into the room. But slowly she started to adjust and even played with her friends at recess sometimes. 3 days later, Wellington called to say he wanted Tyler evaluated by a psychologist. He kept saying Tyler was just a confused kid who needed help, not prison. I agreed to the evaluation because Magdalena said it wouldn't hurt our case. The psychologist spent 4 hours with Tyler at the detention center. When the report came back 2 weeks later, Wellington didn't share it with us. Magdalena got a copy through Discovery and read parts to me over the phone. The psychologist wrote that Tyler showed signs of calculated predatory behavior. He'd been planning the abuse for months before it started. Tyler told the psychologist he studied my work schedule and tested different times to see when I slept deepest. He admitted to setting phone alarms for 2 a.m., because that's when people are in their deepest sleep cycle. The psychologist said Tyler's intelligence made him more dangerous, not less. He knew exactly what he was doing and how to avoid getting caught. Wellington stopped mentioning the evaluation after that. Constantine came by the house that same week with boxes of evidence files. He sat at my kitchen table and went through everything they'd found. The deleted internet searches were the worst part. Tyler had looked up how to keep kids quiet during abuse. He'd searched for information about memory in young children. He'd even researched whether certain medications could make someone more compliant. Constantine said in 20 years of working these cases, he'd rarely seen this level of planning from someone Tyler's age. Most teenage offenders acted on impulse, but Tyler had created a whole system. He'd taken photos at Grandma's house weeks in advance to use as fake alibis. He'd practiced his concerned brother act so well that even I believed it. Constantine said the forensic evidence alone would convict him. They'd found Tyler's DNA under Kelsey's fingernails from where she'd tried to push him away. The bruise patterns matched adult grip strength, not child's play. Every piece of evidence pointed to systematic abuse over at least 6 months. Constantine told me Tyler would definitely be convicted if we went to trial. But he also warned me that trials are hard on victims, especially young kids. That Tuesday night, I was getting Kelsey ready for bed when she had an accident. She hadn't wet the bed in almost a week, but suddenly she was standing in her wet pajamas crying. She kept saying she was sorry over and over. I told her it was okay, that accidents happen, but she got more upset and said I was going to be mad at her. She thought she was in trouble because it wasn't Wednesday. That's when it hit me how much Tyler had messed with her head. She associated wetting the bed with his abuse so strongly that she thought she'd done something wrong. I held her while she cried and promised she wasn't in trouble. Newton said later this was common in abuse victims. Their whole sense of normal gets twisted by what happened to them. Over the next 3 weeks, Wellington and Magdalena went back and forth about a plea deal. Tyler didn't want to admit to anything at first. But when Wellington explained he could be tried as an adult and face real prison time, Tyler changed his mind. The negotiations were awful to sit through. They argued about every detail like it was a business contract instead of my daughter's life. Finally, they reached an agreement. Tyler would plead guilty to multiple counts of sexual abuse of a minor. He'd go to a juvenile facility until he turned 21. After that, 10 years of probation with mandatory treatment. He'd have to register as a sex offender for life. Most importantly, he couldn't contact Kelsey until she was 25 years old. Magdalena said it was a good deal considering Tyler's age. I wanted him locked up forever, but I understood why Kelsey shouldn't have to testify. The plea hearing was set for the following Monday. I spent the weekend writing my victim impact statement. I wrote about the perfect son I thought I had, and the monster he turned out to be. I wrote about Kelsey's medical condition, and how the stress could have killed her. I wrote about the trust he destroyed, and the innocence he stole. Monday morning, we arrived at the courthouse early. Tyler was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He kept his head down and wouldn't look at me. The judge read through the plea agreement and asked Tyler if he understood. He said yes in a voice. So quiet, the judge made him repeat it. Then it was my turn to read my statement. My hands shook as I described finding Tyler in Kelsey's room that night. I talked about the bruises we couldn't explain, and the terror in my daughter's eyes. I said Tyler's betrayal had destroyed our family in ways that could never be fixed. He kept staring at the floor the whole time. When I finished, the judge asked Tyler if he had anything to say. He mumbled that he was sorry, but it sounded empty. The judge accepted the plea and pronounced the sentence. Tyler would stay in juvenile detention until his 21st birthday. Then 10 years of probation with sex offender registration. The no-contact order with Kelsey was permanent until she turned 25. It didn't feel like enough for what he'd done, but at least Kelsey wouldn't have to testify. 2 days later, Silas came for his final visit. He said he was closing our CPS case since Tyler was gone and Kelsey was safe. He praised how I'd handled everything once I knew the truth. He said most parents struggle to believe their own child could do something so terrible. We'd still have access to voluntary services if we needed them. He left his card and said to call if we ever needed anything. The relief of not having CPS involved anymore was huge. Over the next 2 months, Kelsey's liver function slowly got better. Her enzyme levels came down to almost normal range. The hepatologist said the reduced stress was helping her body heal. He warned that stress would always be a trigger for flare-ups with her condition. But for now, her liver was handling things better than it had in years. We started looking for a new house the week after Tyler's sentencing. I couldn't stand being in the place where everything happened. Kelsey needed a fresh start too. We found a small house across town with a big backyard. Kelsey got excited about having her own room again without the bad memories. She picked out butterfly wallpaper that she said looked happy. The moving day was hard but necessary. Newton came by the new house after we'd been there a month. He said Kelsey was making real progress in therapy. She was starting to understand that what Tyler did wasn't her fault. She'd stopped blaming herself for the abuse. He showed me pictures she'd drawn of herself as a superhero fighting bad guys. In one picture, the superhero was protecting a smaller girl from a monster. Newton said this showed she was reclaiming her sense of power and safety. I cried looking at those drawings because they showed my little girl fighting back in her own way. 3 weeks after settling into the new house, the mail brought a letter from Grandma's nursing home with shaky handwriting on the envelope. The staff nurse had helped her write it, asking about Tyler and when he'd visit again for their weekly chess games. My hands shook as I read her confused questions about why her grandson hadn't come in so long. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with all the other painful reminders. The nursing home director called later that week to say Grandma's dementia was getting worse, and she kept asking for Tyler every day. I told them he was away at the school and couldn't visit anymore. They understood without me having to explain further. I sent them photos of Kelsey instead, hoping that might help, but Grandma didn't remember having a granddaughter most days. 6 months after that horrible night in March, I woke up on a Thursday morning and realized Kelsey had slept through the entire Wednesday night without a single nightmare. She came down for breakfast holding her stuffed rabbit and actually smiled when I made her favorite pancakes. Newton had been right during our last session when he said these small victories would add up over time. I marked the date in my calendar with a gold star, the first good Wednesday we'd had. Her teacher called the next week with more good news about Kelsey joining the school art club and making friends with 2 girls in her class. She sent home a painting Kelsey had made of a rainbow breaking through dark clouds that she'd titled, "After the Storm," in careful purple letters. I hung it on the refrigerator and caught myself crying happy tears every time I walked past it. Constantine called one afternoon while I was making dinner to update me on Tyler's situation at the juvenile facility. He was participating in the mandatory treatment program, but the counselor said progress was slow and he still minimized what he'd done. I listened to the update with no emotion at all, realizing that the son I'd loved had died the night I found him in Kelsey's room. The person in that facility was a stranger who happened to share his face. Honoria came by the house with paperwork for victim compensation to help cover Kelsey's ongoing therapy costs. She helped me fill out every form, gathering medical records and therapy bills, and the court documents proving Tyler's conviction. The state approved our application within 3 weeks, sending the first check to cover Newton's sessions for the next 6 months. Artemisia's support group met every Tuesday night at the community center, and those meetings became the only place I could be completely honest about everything. The other mothers understood the specific kind of grief that comes from losing a child who's still alive somewhere. We talked about handling birthdays when the person who hurt your child used to blow out candles at the same table. One mother had been dealing with this for 5 years after her son hurt his stepsister, and she taught me how to answer the questions about where Tyler was without lying, but without explaining everything. Kelsey surprised me one morning by asking if she could take karate classes like her friend Olivia from art club. I called her hepatologist first to make sure physical activity was safe with her liver condition. He approved light exercise and said it might actually help her overall health to be more active. We signed up at the local dojo where the instructor specialized in teaching kids who'd been through trauma. Watching her earn her first yellow belt 2 months later, seeing her break a board with her tiny fist while shouting with confidence, filled me with more pride than I'd felt in a year. The conference invitation came exactly 1 year after everything happened, asking me to speak about recognizing abuse signs in medically fragile children. The organizer said our story could help other parents and medical professionals identify similar situations. I typed a polite decline email explaining we weren't ready to be advocates or educators yet. We were still just survivors learning how to heal one day at a time. Newton suggested during our April session that we could start spacing out Kelsey's therapy appointments since she was making such good progress. She'd gone on her first sleepover at Olivia's house the previous weekend and only called me once to check in. She still had hard days where shadows made her jump or certain smells brought back bad memories, but she was learning to trust again. At Artemisia's group one Tuesday, I started talking to a man named James, whose daughter had been hurt by her gymnastics coach 2 years ago. We understood each other's need to check locks 3 times and know where our kids were every second. He didn't judge me for the GPS tracker in Kelsey's backpack or how I still checked on her 5 times every night. We went for coffee after group the next week, then dinner the week after that. James had the same haunted look in his eyes that I saw in my mirror every morning, but he also knew how to make me laugh about normal things like his daughter's obsession with slime videos. His daughter was 13 now and doing better, giving me hope that Kelsey would keep healing too. We took things slow, both of us too damaged to rush into anything, but it felt good to have someone who understood why I'd never trust easily again. The school called me 3 weeks later about an awards ceremony where Kelsey was getting recognized for something special. I sat in the gym watching her walk up to the stage in her blue dress when they announced she'd been chosen for the Kindness Award because she always helped younger kids who looked sad or scared at recess. She stood there holding that certificate while the principal talked about how Kelsey would sit with first graders who were crying and show them how to make friends or find their classroom. My chest got tight watching her become the protector she'd needed when nobody protected her. 2 years had passed since that awful night I found Tyler in her room, and somehow Kelsey's liver had stayed stable through everything. Her hepatologist checked her enzyme levels every month and kept saying she was his miracle patient, because kids with her condition usually got worse under stress, but she kept getting stronger. He didn't know the full story of what she'd survived, but he could see something special in how her body was fighting back. Constantine called me at work one Tuesday to let me know Tyler had finished his time at the juvenile facility and was starting his adult probation with strict supervision. The no-contact order would stay in place until Kelsey turned 25, and he had to register his address every 90 days, so we'd always know where he was living. I hung up the phone feeling nothing for the person who used to be my son, but relief that the system was tracking him. Kelsey came home from the school that spring talking nonstop about career day and how a pediatric surgeon had visited to explain helping sick kids. She pulled out her notebook where she'd written down all the medical schools and told me she wanted to be a doctor who helped kids like her with liver problems. At 10 years old, she was already checking out library books about anatomy and asking her hepatologist questions about enzyme functions during her checkups. She had 3 best friends now who came over for sleepovers, and they'd stay up late doing each other's nails and watching movies without any of the fear that used to make her freeze when people got too close. James and I had been together almost a year when he stood up during Artemisia's Tuesday support group meeting and asked everyone to be quiet for a minute. He got down on one knee right there in the community center with all the other parents watching and pulled out a small ring box while asking if I'd marry him. Everyone started clapping and cheering while I said yes through tears, and Kelsey jumped up from where she'd been drawing in the corner to hug both of us. She whispered that she was ready for our family to grow in a happy way this time, and that James's daughter could be like the sister she'd always wanted. Newton pulled me aside after Kelsey's therapy session the next month to discuss her progress over the past 2 years. He showed me his notes about how she'd gone from complete shutdown to processing her trauma in healthy ways, and suggested we could move to monthly check-ins instead of weekly. He made sure I understood she wasn't cured because trauma doesn't work that way, but she was learning to live with what happened and thrive despite it. We planned Kelsey's 11th birthday party for the first Saturday in June, and she invited 12 kids from the school, plus James's daughter. I watched her running around the backyard with her friends playing tag and eating cake without any of the jumpiness that used to make her hide behind me at parties. When she blew out her candles surrounded by kids singing to her, I saw strength in her smile that I never knew a child could have after going through what she did. James and I got married at the courthouse in July with just our daughters and Artemisia as witnesses, then drove straight to the beach for a week-long honeymoon with the girls. Kelsey ran straight into the ocean the first morning without checking over her shoulder or asking permission first, while James and I sat on the sand, watching both girls splash in the waves. She dove under the water and came up laughing with seaweed in her hair, then waved at us to come join them in the deeper water past the breakers. We spent that whole week building sandcastles and hunting for shells and eating ice cream for breakfast, because we could finally just be a normal family doing normal things. Next, Kelsey fell asleep in the car on the drive home with her head on her new stepsister's shoulder and sand still stuck between her toes from one last walk on the beach that morning. James reached over and squeezed my hand while he drove, and I looked back at our daughters sleeping peacefully, knowing we'd actually made it through to the other side of everything. She was safe and happy and free in ways I'd thought we'd lost forever that night 2 years ago. Thanks for hanging out and wondering about stuff with me today. I had a lot of fun sharing those curious little moments with you all. Until we meet again, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.